You too.
Anytime you're ready. Carol, do we know if Heather's coming?
Yeah, she's on her way. We just had a meeting, so that's I delayed her.
So, good evening. This is the November 1st, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. We have a 7-member Finance Committee membership. I note that 6 are in attendance. 1 sends his regrets. A quorum is 4. We have a quorum, so I call the meeting to order. So, you have been sent an agenda for this evening's meeting. I think in the cover page accompanying it indicated that the principal focus this evening is going to be making recommendations on warrant articles that are in various stages of completion, but ultimately to be presented before a special town meeting on November 20th. So with that, you, and I'm sorry to say, but also happy to say, have a couple of versions. One is that which was sent to you on Monday morning, which was the most current at that particular time, and wanted to give everybody some advance time to review those. And those have subsequently been updated. The good news is as recently as 6:30 this evening. The bad news is as recently as 6:30 this evening. So we're going to direct our attention to those. As it turns out, the town administrator would be, I think, principal with regards to that discussion. So I'll give you my duck walks into the bar routine rendition of as many jokes as I can as Heather unpacks her backpack, gets settled, and helps us navigate these particular articles. What I have also done, so as not to email everybody to death, is I've shared with you this evening a classed package of about 12 items. Don't mean to be quite remedial, but if you'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner of each of those, they're numbered 1 through 12. And they do not align perfectly with the articles. They just are numbered in terms of the sequence of those particular pages. So on occasion, we may make reference to those. I've also gone so far as to suggest that on occasion, the really critical ones, not that none of them aren't, but the really critical ones we'll actually show on the screen for purposes of our discussion. So, Heather, if you're settled, we're actually speaking to the point of Article 1 right now, which is the Water Enterprise prior year bill. Hopefully, everybody will not only mercifully agree, but I'm not going to read the article word for word. It's in front of you. It's on the screen. So why don't we just dive right in, Heather, and explain to us what Article 1 is.
Sure. So at early July, we received the last water bill from Worcester for the fiscal year of '23. The amount of the bill exceeded what we had appropriated at annual town meeting the year prior to be able to expend from the enterprise fund. We did have enough money, quote unquote, in the bank, but we're not supposed to be spending money that wasn't appropriated. So this is a little bit of housekeeping. Because it was a water utility bill, usually, if this was for, let's say, supplies and services, or, we had bought paper, whatever it may be, and we didn't have the funds appropriated for it, we'd have to wait till town meeting. But in talking to the accountant and treasurer, because it was the Worcester Water Department that we owed money to, what we said is we notified them and let them know we were only going to pay what we had left in our approved budget for that fiscal year. And then we would have to go to annual or a special town meeting to appropriate the rest. But in the meantime, you know, like any utility bill, they just tag it on to your amount, so you end up paying it as you go. So this is just a housekeeping issue to make sure everything's kosher. And it's a transfer from the water retained earnings that have been certified to be able to cover the amount of the bill and get the budgets up to date.
So this water bill in particular that we're talking about is number one in the package that I just made reference to. It's also in the back of the warrant article package as well. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
So the question that I have is, notwithstanding that we got a bill and we use the water and we need to pay it, how is it that the water department overlooked or got surprised or didn't know that a $55,000 bill, which is no small chunk of change, was forthcoming or going to be forthcoming from the city of Worcester?
So there's a number of things to look at, right? So last year, we had a number of water breaks and needed additional pieces and parts that we hadn't originally budgeted for or appropriated when we went in. Things broke and we had to fix them. So when they fixed those things, they pulled away from the budget that would have normally gone to the water bills. That's number one. Number two, keep in mind that a lot of towns have the luxury of having their own water in-house, right? They don't have to buy it. They pay for someone to oversee the service, maybe, for a water treatment plant, but they don't have to buy it. For us, we have to buy the water, but we don't always know how much water we're going to have to buy until we know how much water people use. So we try to estimate the best we can. In addition to people using water, we also have to account for water that is lost, right? A water main breaks, spills X number of gallons a minute. We still have to pay for that water, even though that water is just now kind of hanging out under our streets, right? So it's always a guess. The third part of the answer is this. In talking to the water commissioners this year, they were under the impression that they could not budget more money for an upcoming budget year beyond what they had received in revenues the year before. The problem with that piece is they knew that some of their expense numbers were going to be higher than what they actually came in at. And same thing with, when we get to the water enterprise budget a little bit later on. So we are moving forward to remedy that this fiscal year and going forward, but you can't always do things going backwards.
Okay, so at least I have one more question.
Sure.
Is it possible for everybody to take a look at Article 7 at the same time?
Sure.
I know we're going to vote on them separately, but they're both the water department.
Sure.
And when we get to Article 7, I think there's a series of other questions that I might have, but the one that I have right now is that they're looking in Article 7 to change a vote that was taken place on June 5th of 2023.
Correct.
And in order to do that, if you look at the math and you look at the accounting fairly carefully, they need to draw $47,000 from retained earnings in Article 7 and $21,000 from retained earnings in Article 1. Not trying to be the accounting wonk, but the definition of retained earnings is earnings that you've retained. We're not retaining those, and whereby they're not separately audited. We really don't see the detail that maybe going forward the Finance Committee would like to see. The question is, do they have sufficient retained earnings in order for it to take a hit on both of these particular articles, or is the retained earnings being converted into a deficit balance?
So that's a couple questions. So let me see if I can back up a little for you. So in having the meeting with the water commissioners a week or so ago with Travis and Tiffany and the board, we had a lot of conversations. We went through details of expenses over the past several years, and we tried to look at some of the revenues. So the first thing to note is the water rates themselves haven't been updated in a number of years, right? They've been the same. They haven't been increased. They've been hanging out at the same. The second thing to look at is what they've normally done with the water retained earnings. So the past couple of years, if you look at it, they have usually just about enough water retained earnings to cover the debt service for the Asnabumskate tank, which has been coming in the past couple of years at about $107,000. This upcoming year, for FY '25, it actually drops down to approximately $21,000. So the need to hold on to those retained earnings to be able to cover the cost of that at the annual town meeting, they can do with a lot less. That being said, a couple things to keep in mind. One, retained earnings are like free cash, and the state sees them as one-time purpose funds, right? Some towns are very lucky and they're able to generate some additional retained earnings. They keep those retained earnings over time. And one thing many of the towns will do is they'll actually use those funds to reduce the need for a substantial rate increase or help keep the rates a little bit stagnant, right? So this case here, we're doing a combination of things. Number one, we're trying to stabilize the rates a little bit so they don't have to go up as substantially. Number two, we actually need to buy some time to understand the rates a little bit more. So as it currently stands, we have 5 categories for water rates. We have institutional, commercial, residential, sprinkler, and municipal. Okay, so we have the 5 categories. Most of those categories have 3 tiers. For instance, residential, you use up to 7,500 gallons, you pay X dollars per gallon. One of the problems we ran into is because it's so complex, right? Just because you're paying in the first tier doesn't mean you're paying that all 7,500 gallons worth. So it was very hard to figure out how much money we were pulling in from each of those pieces. The other thing that's always interesting, so we have the 5 categories. It's pretty safe to assume that with the municipal, institutional, commercial, and even the sprinkler being, I think, 4 users total, 3 of them are town properties, one's residential, that they're at about 100% collection. The residential, it's harder to figure out what the actual amount of collection is. We have the data from the light company, but even with the data from the light company, we only really know what the total amount is that we billed collectively and the total amount is that we pulled in that following month. They don't necessarily correspond, right? We could have billed 90,000 and pulled in 70,000, but we could have maybe only got 60,000 from this month's billing and the rest were from prior billings. We don't have the ability to figure that out without going into individual users. Because there's so many individual users, that'd be insane to figure out those numbers. So one of the things we kind of abandoned ship on was going backwards to from $21.47 per month to $27 per month. So that will increase that number. I think we said by, forget the total amount, I don't have it on the top of my head and I'm gonna mess it up if I say it out loud. So it gets us part of the way there, right? It increases the departmental receipts. If you take the number that was there previously, I think it increases about $40,000, give or take, because I think it was $1,040,something thousand at the annual town meeting. So we're able to increase the departmental receipts by $40,000 or so. And that's taking into consideration when you calculate out the different categories, about a 90% collection rate on the residents, right? So just like when we're budgeting our revenues for our general fund, we always want to be on the conservative end. Again, because we don't have something solidified that tells us the percentage of collection rates, and when you use the numbers we do have based on what the light company bills for the water department on a monthly basis, and what we're collecting on that month, it ranges anywhere from 67% to about 110%, depending on the month, year end, so forth. So we had to come up with a number that we had some confidence in. So that's where those numbers come from. As a typo, Donna caught earlier, it should say 47,177 to get to the right number. So I made a mistake on that calculation. But the good news is water commissioners voted the higher number, so we're okay. As far as
So if my colleagues will indulge me, let me ask my shorter question shorter. Do they have the money and retained earnings to sustain both of these hits?
So yes, they do. So they have enough money, they certified this year, I want to say at $109,000. So you take out the, what did we say, 27, what was the first article?
21.
21,246. So you take out the 21,246, you take out the 47,177, and then you even take out the 21,000 for the annual town meeting that's up and coming in May, for the cost of the Asnabum skid tank, and you do have money retained, left. It's not a high number, but it is a number. The goal from here is to work on revising the water rates so that we have something that's, makes sense, that we can calculate off of, and that we can implement and the water commissioners can support for July 1st. So it will in fact impact the FY '25 budget year, which will help, I believe, with retained earnings moving forward. Because one of the things that I've also asked them to look at, in addition to just the rates, is thinking about their budget long-term. So just like we do a 5-year projection, also considering what their needs are, including, do they need to replace things? Do they need studies? What do they need done? To include those capital pieces in their expenses so they can build up the retained earnings.
Steve?
A couple questions, if I may. You stated relative to the first Article 1, that there were repairs needed relative to the water department. Do you have any idea what kind of money was spent on repairs relative to the 21,246.64 deficit?
So I don't have that information in front of me, Steve. I can talk to Travis tomorrow and kind of get an outlined list of unanticipated repairs and expenses they incurred last year.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me.
Okay, so obviously then you don't have the second one, which would be how much water, does Travis have any means to estimate how much water was wasted as a result of the repair needed? You talked about the modification of the planning budget process for the water department. What are the steps that are being redefined as part of that process to ensure we don't have this happen again?
So one of the things we did, when we talked about it at the water commissioners meeting, and, it was document use, so I'm always happy to distribute it because it would be public record, is we reviewed the water budget in a similar detailed fashion as, we'll call it the Heather version of Excel sheets last year for other department budgets, right? So you have the wage sheet, you have the summary sheet, you have supplies, purchase services, and so forth. If you look at the documents Larissa produces our accountant on a monthly basis, we just have it's very simple, it's very undetailed with the line items, but in general, the water department's done a good job over the years of keeping out the details. It's just not something usually we move forward. Last year, people saw a little bit more detail when we did the budget presentation they did before the FinCom. So it's kind of those pieces, but each of them, they were quite concerning, but also costs staff time, overtime, and expenses. So we're able to use those in our factors into predicting a conservative budget for the rest of the fiscal year to make sure that we had enough money in those accounts to be able to go forward.
All right, so based upon what your adjustments are from the base meter rate of 21.47 to 27 flat starting in January, what does that net look like then in the revenue piece at the end of the year, fiscal year for the water department?
So that should, assuming we, there's assumptions made here, right? So assuming that the expenses all come into the penny of where we think they'll come in, and nothing is extremely over or it balances itself out, then we should, net pretty close to those same numbers. But generally speaking, even with estimating the expenses high, and bringing in a little bit more on the revenue side, we should be generating retained earnings. The question is to what extent, I don't know, because it goes back to the water rates themselves and the data I just don't have. Every year we seem to consistently pull in. If you look at the past several years, around 100 and something thousand for retained earnings. So we should be generating, I would imagine, around the same, but it's hard to tell. The water use, so we did increase, and again, I'm happy to send it out to Mark and he can distribute it to the FinCom. What we had talked about for the budget numbers, the water numbers we know over the past couple of years have gone up in use of cost. One of the things, and I presented it at the select board meeting, was to keep in mind that the last year, what was that, 22 to 23, the cost per, I'm trying to think what it is, a cubic foot? Do you remember how Worcester charges us as a cubic foot?
Should be on the bill one.
Oh, I guess.
That
the bill
number,
would-
it has to
What a
be.
cubic gallon.
Yeah.
We're looking at a number that's not, certainly not gallons.
Yeah.
Oh, it
I
can't
want,
be gallons.
I want to say it's cubic foot, but anyway, so they went up 1 cent per 22 to 23, and our water usage as well as our cost increase. Well, 23 to 24, they went up 10 cents. So it's more substantial. The other thing to keep in mind, if you remember from a few select board meetings ago, Travis presented that they'll be flushing the water tank to clean it, which means we have to pay for all that water to refill it, right? Even though we're not using it, we're just draining the water, we still have to pay for it. So we wanted to take those pieces into consideration. So I've been working with Travis and Tiffany and the board to start thinking about these things longer term, to try to put the more consistent idea of what we're gonna generate for the revenues, right? Like, if you think of it, the flat rate for every meter, that's an easy one, right? You take that number, you multiply it by the number of customers, and you have your number. Even if you calculate by 90% collections, you still can figure out, I'm guaranteed approximately X dollars. And you can base that. So the idea is trying to get the other water rates to be a somewhat similar consistency.
One final question. Based upon what you've just described and the base meter rate going up,
Yep.
have you provisioned for any growth within the town relative to that number as a base customer number? And the second part of my question is, whether that's a yes or no, and what that means, how comfortable are you, Travis, and the rest of the water department commissioners, in that we are, in effect, by raising it to $27 flat, that it is going, that we in effect will meet the goal, the June 30th goal?
I think we're feeling pretty good with that number, with adding the additional piece. It's definitely, like I mentioned earlier, not the end-all, be-all. The rest of the rates need to be looked at, and they haven't been increased in a number of years, but we need to, I think, get a better handle so it's easier to manage. And just easier even for the resident to look at and understand what they're seeing before them, and see if there's a better way to do it so it's more consistent, we can count on the revenue on a more regular basis. And I'm sorry, Steve, I was trying to answer the latter part of the question. I already
Growth.
got the first.
Growth, is there any?
Oh, growth.
Any kind of projected growth within the numbers?
I haven't had that conversation with Travis. I don't know if there's a lot of build-out open for where we currently have our system laid. We'd have to lay new pipe, I believe, in
But
structure.
are we talking about for the meters? Because we wouldn't build out a growth for the meters. Are you talking about the meters or for the water?
No, I think he's talking about new customers, Steve.
Yeah, new
Correct.
customers.
I'm talking about potentially a new base, a new number added to the base, right?
We don't tend to overestimate.
I'm not suggesting
No, I'm saying- you're saying like
overestimating. I'm
growth.
asking,
Yeah.
have they estimated or provision for any
I would say no.
relative to growth?
Yeah.
Are we assuming flat?
I think right now we're assuming flat,
Customers.
Steve.
Okay,
Customers.
I think,
current
you know,
customers.
If there was ever any desire to build out the current system, because I think we serve, is it 2/3 or 1/3 of the town? It's something of the thirds. I was Travis.
On this article. Here's where I am, and Seth Peters would probably say it better. We got a bill, we owe the money, we got to vote to approve it. There's not a lot of options, but my sense is I never feel quite comfortable with the information that we get from the water department or the limited information that we get. So maybe speaking a little bit to Steve's point, not this evening, but going forward, it just seems that there's got to be a more thorough presentation, because when we vote on a warrant article, we vote on 4 numbers, and then here we are back 3 months later, 4 months later, voting to increase it, which we really don't have any choice because we owe the city of Worcester $21,247.
247.
So we got to do that, but I do it with a certain degree of discomfort. And that's problematic to me personally, and maybe with some further information and more transparency and better detail and a better presentation at another time, I'll feel better, but I just don't feel comfortable about it. So I'll leave it at that. So we can vote on these. I think it's advisable. We have an option to vote on these this evening. We can hold our vote. We could do it at another meeting, keeping in mind we'd have to do it before November 20th. Or we can do it on a short meeting before the special town meeting on the 20th, but we risk not having a quorum at that particular point. So I'm open to whatever the committee would like to do, and that is to make a motion on all of these, or some of these, or wait, or do whatever you like.
I think we have to pay the bill, so I'll make a motion at a minimum on Article 1.
Picking up
I
on my
second.
first point. So there's a motion to accept Article 1, there's a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None.
Mark,
Passes.
you said accept Article 1. Did you mean recommend Article 1?
Recommend approval.
Recommend approval.
So when you said
for-
accept, you meant recommend approval?
To accept, yeah. To
Okay.
recommend approval. Do we need to,
Nope.
is that friendly amendment? Okay. Okay. So if you don't mind, can we just jump to Article 7 then, which is the Water Enterprise Fund again? And in your package, folks, under number 2, what you see in the package I passed out in number 2 is the article that we voted on 4 months ago on June 5th. It's not side by side, it's not comparable, but if you can see from the article that we voted on June 5th and the article we're being asked to vote on right here, example, compensation up on the board is $250,000. We voted 4 months ago at $240,000. Expenses are up on the board at $799. We voted 4 months ago at $720, and so on and so forth. So my question, with benefit of what's on the screen, Heather, and the handout that we have, why is compensation going up by $10,000?
So I just sent, Jeremy, did you get the email I just sent you?
Not yet.
Okay. So I just sent Jeremy an email with the Excel spreadsheet that I had gone over with nope, try again. Water commissioners last week. So there's 2 pieces that increase. Let me just pull up my little comment here so I don't misstate anything.
I did not receive.
No? Okay.
What time did you
okay.
send it?
About 5 minutes ago, 4 minutes ago.
Which address?
The pace. No dice.
No.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Let me just pull up my little memo here. All right, so the compensation line went up by about $19,892. It is an expected increase based on qualifications for the water operator for $2,995 this year, based on their years of service, training, and so forth. Based on the union contract, they would go up. The admin assistant, we did rescore that position, and we retroed it back to July 1st, increasing it to $3,327, or by $3,327 for the water portion. Water overtime, at the end of the first quarter, we were at $4,160. If you assume that's gonna continue to be consistent, multiplied by the 4 quarters, it's closer to $16,630 $8,138, or a difference of $8,138. We had budgeted for the approved budget, $8,500. Highway employees, the end of the first quarter, because they help out when we have water breaks, was $3,432 we already expended. If you extrapolate that out the 4 quarters, you get $13,729, or a difference of $5,431. I did send this to Mark and Jeremy about, what did I say, 5 minutes ago, so hopefully you can both get it. And they can send it out.
So let me ask a slightly different question. You can answer all the questions as to why. Mm-hmm. So let me ask the how come.
So,
What is so different on November 1st that wasn't available when the water department was here presenting their budget 4 months ago? And I'm looking at 52 other cost centers that could come in and say the same thing, and we'd have a huge problem on our hands if everybody's budget changed because they have new information, which part of the budget process is to project that information when you submit your budget.
So they knew that their numbers are going to be higher than what they budgeted. As I mentioned earlier, the concern was that they were always under the impression that they couldn't budget a higher expense amount than the amount they had raised the year before received in revenues. So they were just going on what they had always understood. They understood in their minds that the revenues they had raised the year before was the cap that they could expend the upcoming year, even though the expenses, as you know, go up year to year. What we've talked about is, making sure that we understand our revenue side of things, and if we need to increase revenues, it's an enterprise budget. Enterprise budget's different than the general fund. General fund, you look at all your revenues, you figure out what your budget is, just like your household income. I have $10 to spend. My paycheck's $10. I can't expend 11, I only make 10. And you have to stay within that budget. A enterprise fund is different. You have to look at the total expense because you want to make sure it's self-sustaining. You look at the total cost of what would be self-sustaining for that department, and then you go back and you look at the revenues and say, are we going to be raising enough, or do we need to make adjustments to our revenues to make sure we can cover the cost of our expenses? That's not something that they had recently discussed, so it's something we started discussing. Is we actually were looking at each individual line to come to the most accurate number we could and saying, okay, we need to look at the revenues. Again, the reason we're using retained earnings instead of just going after raising all the revenues at this point is severalfold. Number one, you have to give people enough notice that you're going to increase it. So you don't want to all of a sudden just increase in January. Number two, you also don't want to increase things multiple times. So while we're increasing the flat meter rate, we're not looking at the other rates until July, hence using the retained earnings to buy a little time and stabilize things so we can do it very intelligently, make sure we're taking time, making sure everything makes sense, and weighing out how that actually calculates out in the future.
May I make a suggestion as a result of lessons learned here?
I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't hear the last part.
I said, can I make a suggestion relative to this whole discussion around lessons learned here?
Sure.
I believe every department that submits a budget should also submit as part of that budget process their assumptions, i.e., I assume I can't spend more than what was previously retained in earnings the year before. I mean, because clearly that is a huge miss. I heard you correctly, correct? They assumed they couldn't spend what was
Right.
beyond.
So,
But they also, in their discussions with you, never brought up that could be a restricted parameter relative to their budget process.
so I think moving forward, Steve, I think they're going to be in really good shape, right? We've established kind of a process, the details, all of the pieces and so forth. I always, I have a phrase I like to use sometimes, my rearview mirror.
So here we are at a point of making a recommendation to approve or a recommendation to disapprove. What happens if we disapprove?
So it's a great question. So I once was at a town meeting where there was a recommendation, believe it or not, from the FinCom to not approve the water budget because they didn't agree with one of the lines. It was seconded, it was approved, and they moved forward. After a conversation with the moderator, he thought it should be brought back up for reconsideration because if you disapprove a water budget, you close the water department and you close your water service. So I don't think that's as dire here. What would happen, though, is you'd have to end up having the water department, one of a few things. Number one, they'd have to go back in and potentially drastically increase the rates, but then they'd still have to go back to a town meeting, because if they're gonna raise more than what they say they're gonna raise here in departmental receipts, I believe they would need to or they potentially, I guess the receipts part's a little different than the expenses, would potentially have to go back in and say that they're planning to raise more. The second thing is they're gonna end up overexpending their budget that they currently have on paper, 100% guaranteed over what was appropriated, so they'd either have to go back to annual town meeting and have the same article come back up, or you might have to have a special town meeting in advance of that if it looks like they're exceeding that amount of money, or going to exceed that amount of money prior to the next town meeting.
So what would happen if we took no action?
So if you could take no action or decide not to recommend or not recommend. It's still up to the town meeting members and the select board to recommend and make a decision on it. I think my strong recommendation is, why wouldn't you recommend, right? Like, this is the best interest of the department. It's not coming out of the general fund. If we do run a deficit at some point, sometimes you have to go to the general fund to cover the deficit, and I don't think you want that. But the town is responsible for making sure they manage this budget.
Yeah, the saving grace is that it's its own enterprise fund, and it doesn't hit the general fund.
Well, and one of the benefits of the
But
enterprise
the
fund
other
is
side of that,
self-sustaining.
which I think is the general sense, is it just seems that the process and the budget preparation might not have gotten the attention that it deserves, and we're hoping it'll get the attention it deserves going forward, so we don't have to do this again.
Well, and I think that's part of our conversation we just had earlier, as well as the one I had the other week with the water commissioners, right? Which is giving them whatever tools they need in front of them to be able to make those budget calculations moving forward, looking at past history, looking at future calculations, and also, coming up with a water rate structure that's more easily predictable than what we currently have.
So I would entertain a recommendation to approve.
Recommend.
Motion's been made.
Second?
It's been seconded. Could the minutes reflect that the motion was meekly made and the second was meekly seconded? Is there any discussion? Eric?
I'll say one thing. I think, I understand some of the concerns of the FinCom of this was probably not done correctly. I also think, though, that Heather, you've identified the issue, identified what's going to be fixed. And so, unfortunately, time will tell if that is done right. But I think, based on the fact that this is for the water department, this is not coming out of the general fund, I think we should move forward to it.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion to recommend approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Passes unanimously. So, Heather and Finance Committee members, the next one's Article 2.
I have your email, Heather. Sorry.
Say
Just
again?
got it. I just got Heather's email. That's,
You want to reconsider the vote?
no, I'm sorry. Moving forward.
Well timed.
Yep.
So Articles 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. In the text of it has the words free cash. And so noted that you've added "and any other funds." in those articles. So if I could speak to the free cash issue first, and in everybody's handout, there's page number 3, and Jeremy,
Yep.
if at all possible, if you could call it up. And please excuse the fact that this isn't a perfect Excel file, because I did not have a chicken walk across this particular page. That's actually my handwriting. But if you scroll down to the bottom, and I've circled the words free cash, that in FY '23, we relied on 689,000, I'll round up or down, of free cash to balance our budget. The current year, we're relying on 564,000 to balance the budget. If you go to the far left-hand column, you see the number 619. If you scroll to the top, that's what it was for FY '22. So if we didn't have that free cash in our budget, we would have had to have made that same level of cuts in the budgets or had an override to that particular extent. So the saving grace is that we did have the free cash to use for those 3 successive years of budgets. The notation to the right is currently free cash was just now certified at 538,000. In these articles that we're going to speak to, at one time there were 15 articles, and they were calling for us to draw down $54,000 from that free cash. In the articles that did survive that we are speaking about this evening, $44,000 is being asked or to be considered to draw down, which if they all went as listed here and the funding of them were in the form of free cash, then our free cash to be used for the budget that we're going to be meeting on in a couple of months is not going to be 538, it's going to be 494, and 494 is $70,000 less than we have currently. So if you scroll up on the right-hand side, you can see the, if you could go down a little bit, Jeremy, you see the 70,000, but that doesn't include at the top of the page that we're going to have additional dispatch expenses of 38,000, Worcester County retirement of 102, health insurance of 75, central purchasing of 12, not to mention what the increases in the departments are going to be, what the increase in Wachusett Regional School District is going to be, or what Bay Path is going to be. So my point is in the form of a question: do we really want to take out of free cash to fund these other 5 articles, when I think we're going to be able to demonstrate this evening there are other sources other than free cash, which is the quick, the easy, the expedient vote, but that's going to impose a huge hardship on us going forward. I think we need as much free cash as possible. You'll also see in your packet under item number 4, which I don't think Jeremy has on the screen, but item number 4 is just the cover page of the financial management policies that I've spared everybody, but I'm holding them up right here, that speak to the point of we need to get away from relying on free cash to balance our budget, but we should do so over a 10-year plan. And then when we get to that particular point, then maybe we'll have the luxury of funding some of these things that are before us this evening. But I would submit to you that we're going to put ourselves in a difficult position if we take all of that money and vote in favor of these articles as they're proposed. I think that all of the articles as they presented are worthy, but I don't like the funding that's being recommended. And that's part of my reason right there. I just think it's crippling our free cash position. So with that, if you look at Article number 2, which speaks to the point of the Cemetery Commission, they're basically looking at $1,800 to come from free cash for an issue that they didn't anticipate 3 or 4 months ago. And if I'm not mistaken, it has to do with a stone wall, is that correct, Heather?
I believe so.
Was that a renovation of a stone wall, or was that a repair as a result of an accident?
I think it's the latter.
So it was a repair because of an accident. So clearly something that's worthy of funding. I think, though, that if you take also a look at your particular handouts, which is item number 6 in your handout, and Jeremy, I think you have a copy of it. If you could call it up on the screen. And without any marketing glamour or sizzle, it's called item number 6. But if you look at the cemetery, which is in the middle of the page under DPW, can you see that? It's account 2216 and account 8416. That's a question I raised. It's a question that the Capital Improvement Planning Committee raised, even though it's not really their hunt because it's under $10,000. But I believe it was an issue of discussion at the October 25th Board of Selectmen meeting. Is it possible for those particular revolving funds to be used to pay that $1,800 and not the free cash? And I think that we were going to town council to see if that was a consideration. I don't know if that answer came back, but it's a question I'm posing in addition to the select board posing it.
Sure, so I can explain both of these. So I actually reached out to Donna Kuchar and Larissa, who's our treasurer and then accountant, so there's 2 lines there, right? So the second one is perpetual expendable. See, it's not very high, it's only 5,000 some change. So that's the interest that's generated from the perpetual care or sale of cemetery lots. That's the larger amount of $100,000 and some change. So the higher that number is, the more interest, I believe, it generates into the second line, and then the second line is something they use on a regular basis if something comes up outside their normal budget, usually that they can expend from. That number has been going down over the years. They've been pretty aggressively using it as they go. The sale of the cemetery lots is approximately $102,000 right now. In order to appropriate it under master law, we have to go to town meeting for a vote to appropriate. The MGL did not, based on Donna Kuchar's research, she did not believe it cited specifically that we needed cemetery commission to expend. However, I would strongly recommend that we have cemetery commission recommendation to expend. I think that's the ERC, not a AC,
That's not right.
not a plane going over.
I can hear the air conditioning a little bit more than I can hear you. Is that just me, or
No,
is
it's
it
fine.
everybody else?
I generally
You
talk
as-
pretty loud.
Can you shout as loud as you can?
I could, but then I'd be deafening, wouldn't I? Can everyone hear? Steve, can you hear me okay? You're the furthest away.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the sale of cemetery lots piece. So the cemetery commission is actually going to meet next week, I believe, on the 8th, to discuss this possibility of expending those potentially 1 or 2 of those articles from 1 or both of those lines to see if they were in support of that. But just keep in mind that the more you pull from the sale of cemetery lots, again, I believe that's the principle, you are going to be reducing the amount they're generating on the interest side down below. So they'll have less money to pull from, which means they inevitably at some point would come back to the town more than what they currently do. The idea is when those lines are set up, usually it's to perpetuate the ongoing care of the cemetery over time, even after people have put their money in and they can continue to care for those spots. So it's kind of self-relying in those pieces. So that's the comment I would have there. The only other thing I would add, Mark, just to make sure that it's clear. So the reason we chose, or I chose initially from the articles, free cash, was, if you remember, most of these items that are on here, that are on those articles, are things that are unanticipated emergency expenses, right? Like, we didn't know Ian Goby was going to resign, result in a special election, and we were gonna have to deal with a special primary and a special state election, each to the tune of a little over $3,000, right? We didn't know the generator was going to have some mice move in and cause havoc, right? We didn't know that the cemetery wall was going to get taken down by an accident, whatever may have happened, right? All of those pieces are totally eligible under the law to go taken from reserve fund. Finance Committee is the sole keeper of the reserve fund. There's only $40,000 in the reserve fund. If we were to pull all of those expenses from the reserve fund right now, you would have no money in the reserve fund for November.
But Heather, let me interrupt you. No one's saying that. No one's saying that. What I'm saying is, all those things that you've cited, no one had anticipated the mice were gonna eat this building, or somebody was
Just
gonna
the
drive
generator,
their
Mark,
car
just the
through the
generator.
storm. I understand that. But free cash shouldn't be the newfound candy store that we go to and raid, because you just said if we take from this line on the screen up there, then less income, interest income is gonna fall to the next line. Well, if we take from free cash, then we're gonna have less available in order to balance our budget. So it's the take from Peter to pay Paul issue, no matter what instance that you raise. So I guess we need to have a draw. We're both making good points. These all need to be funded. My point is free cash the best way or the only way? Because I would submit to you, if it can't be out of those particular funds, and the Cemetery Commission is gonna meet next week, then let's take it out of capital depreciation fund, which doesn't impact the budget that we're gonna be preparing in 3 or 4 months. It's there for those particular reasons. Another option, which is not my first option, is the reserve fund. We have 40,000. Probably don't want to spend any of it, but this special revenue fund is an option. Capital depreciation fund is an option. The reserve fund is an option. And free cash should be a distant consideration if none of those three can be complied with. That's my point.
So I guess the only thing I would say, and I think I mentioned this at the select board meeting, and Mark, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, so the finance policy suggests getting away from balancing a budget with free cash. I understand free cash keeps going down year over year because our budget gets tighter year over year and we have less money that we're generating or not expending because things happen. The Division of Local Services would support the notion that free cash is for one-time expenses, right? To support not to support ongoing costs or to balance the budget. So I would argue that, you know, these articles coming from free cash, it's what free cash is there for. That being said, I don't think there's anything wrong with using, you know, reserve fund to take care of all of these articles. But my biggest concern is because it's such a tight budget year. If you remember last year, we cut substantially as much as we could from the budgets already. They're running very tight. Luckily we did bottom line budget, so we're able to move money if there's like, you know, and you'll see, if you look online, you'll see like $100 transfer here, $23.72 there, right? So if we have a little extra in one line, we move it to the next line to make the purchase we need to make. But you're getting to the point where we're not gonna be generating the free cash even in those lines, and we might even end up going over in some of those budgets because things are so tight. If we completely deplete the reserve fund at this point, we're gonna be in big trouble. We might have to go to a special town meeting
We're
before.
not completely depleting it. It has $40,000 in its balance right now. We haven't voted to take a nickel out of it, so we're not depleting it. And if we did vote to spend $1,800, which I'm not advocating, I think that should be the third choice, that's not depleting it either. So Heather, on the financial management policies, I'm not going to bore everybody because it's 100 pages long, but on page 24, you keep advocating the fact that this is a one-time expenditure. Let me read what the actual line says. Upon the elimination of the operating budget's dependence upon free cash, we're not there yet. We're not free of that. That could take 10 years. Then financing non-recurring one-time expenditures, free cash would be an option. Not now, not next year, when we get there, when we have eliminated the reliance. We haven't done that. So we can go to wherever we want to go with this in terms of interpretation, but this has been approved at town meeting by the select board, by the
Not-
finance committee.
Not by town meeting, Mark. That's not approved by town meeting.
Well, nevertheless, it's been approved by the select board and by the finance committee, and I'm just reading from it. I'm not making it up as I go along. We're not there yet, so I don't think we want to use free cash. That's my point. I think there are other options other than free cash. And I don't want to have that same discussion with the other 5 articles that we're going to have, because I think that there are other solutions there as well. So what we need to do is determine, and quite frankly, if you look at the cemetery budget, they've already spent 97% of their budget. So there's a problem somewhere with that budget as well, that they would spend 97% of their budget already and have this particular item that they can't sustain, and they need to come to town meeting and have us resolve it. We're happy to do so, but not free cash. I would advocate, if you look at the bottom of the page, capital depreciation fund has $52,000. I've maintained for a long time, the auditors have said the same thing, and the gentleman from the Collins groups has said the same thing. We should have $552,000 there. So who cares if we spend $1,800 of it? It's underfunded. We need to use free cash going forward to fund those particular items, capital depreciation and stabilization. We shouldn't be spending free cash now to repair a stone wall, which is in need. It needs our respect and our attention to repair, but not free cash. So the way that it's worded is a little bit difficult, because it says free cash or any available funds.
So my recommendation is, I think I sent an email to you earlier, was I actually, as the FinCom, wouldn't vote on any of the finance money articles until the motions come out, because you don't, or you're gonna end up with contingent recommendations, right? We've recommended if it's sourced from this, we don't recommend if it's sourced from that. I think it's too premature to vote on those articles. As you can see, we have them now say, or, that's the old version, what is it here? Or any available funds, right? So the first choice is free cash, or it could be any available funds, and until we write the motion, we don't have something for you guys to support as far as where the money's coming from.
So logistically, I made mention 10 or 20 minutes ago. How is that going to occur? What if we don't have a quorum for the special town meeting? How can we vote on it without a quorum?
I don't have the answer for that question, Mark. I can just tell you that I don't know where the select board's gonna ultimately recommend that the motions, where the funding comes from, at least until we know that, like I said, Cemetery Commission meets next week on the 8th, and the select board meets again on the 13th. So until then, I don't know what the motion's actually gonna read. That's why we added the flexibility or any available funds, because we were asked to research other possible avenues to fund things from, and until we have those motions made, I don't know how FinCom can make a recommendation on those finance articles yet as to where the money's coming from.
Yeah, this,
Because you'd be on contingencies.
no, and again, not to speak out, this has put us in a corner. It really has. It's being delayed. You can't say with a week left to go, well, you're gonna have to get a quorum and finalize your recommendation.
So you,
That's just, again, this, to me, and again, the cemetery one, it seems preposterous to me. It's like you've got you know, you need 1,800 in your checking account, and you've got 102 in your savings account, and you're going to go to the bank to take out a loan. They shouldn't even be asking. That money should go from that to pay for that. Free cash, we know, you know, we say, well, we didn't expect these things. The one thing that we do expect is this budget year is going to be impossibly tough, and free cash is, unless the cemetery commission wants to put that towards the budget, have at it. You know, it seems maddening that we're going to delay this until the select board meets on the 13th, and then we're going to have no time to make a recommendation.
If you remember from the select board meeting we just had, Mark had actually asked the select board to look at alternative sources for some of the funding
Yes.
other than just from free cash. Well, in order to do that, we need a little time to do it, right? I need to have cemetery commission meet.
Sure.
We need to look at a few things. So my original recommendation were the articles to say from free cash, and Mark asked specifically to look at other sources, but to look at other sources sometimes takes a little time to coordinate people to put them together to be able to do it. It's not an intentional delay to tell you what source of funding the motion's gonna be the recommendation from. It's literally following up on the request we were asked to do.
Would we, or could Mark suggest or recommend what we think would, I mean, it seems like over here you say, here's what I think would be really good sources, and you've got the knowledge to do that.
Yep.
And on this side, it's, we don't know what the other sources are. Could we suggest what they are? Because I agree with what Jeremy said. It seems like the budget is becoming more and more of like an academic exercise to a lot of these departments, where it's like, we thought we were supposed to put the budget together this way. However you're supposed to put it together, you should be adhering to it. If you don't have the money, you don't have the money. There's nowhere for it to come from
So you
at this
have,
point. I mean, I get that, but I don't know where it's
So
just, yeah.
Let me just steal a good clarification, qualification, Heather. I was at that meeting. I'm not sure I said recommend other sources as much as I said free cash is not the source that you should focus on. There are other sources to consider. And I said, I think at the Finance Committee, there's going to be a great amount of difficulty utilizing free cash, which we need for the budget, to fund these 5 items. I'm pretty certain that's what I said. So as Tony is just saying, I got 3 recommendations. Use those particular, exhaust the possibility to use those special revenue funds. If that doesn't work, use capital depreciation, and if that doesn't work, use the reserve fund. Those are my 3 suggestions, none of which include free cash. So how we can textualize that in an article, I don't know. That's for the attorneys to do. But I can tell you, I've been at this table a long time. We're not going to have a quorum before the meeting of the special town meeting. And if we do, we're not going to decide on each one of these in 30 seconds. It's going to take a while. So I just don't see that as practical or functional or likely to occur. I think we got to find another way of making a recommendation this evening as to where the funding should be. I don't like free cash, and I don't like available funds, because that's way too loose for me. Because you know what available funds could include? Free cash. And we haven't gained a thing. So I think we got to tighten it up a little bit this evening.
well, just keep in mind, the select board already voted the language of the warrant, right? So these articles aren't gonna change before it's posted. The only thing that's gonna change at this point is going to be the motions. So the articles, and the select board added the provision to add in available funds when legal revised it and through the purview of legal to make sure everything looked good. So the article itself is now the article.
So then we vote these the way that they're written, and we vote them tonight. And if we don't agree with free cash, then we don't recommend to approve.
Right.
We have the ability to speak to that at the meeting, right, as to why we believe.
I'm sure somebody would ask. Usually people would ask why the finance committee would not, usually someone from the audience would say, why did the finance committee vote to approve, vote not to approve, vote to take no action? Usually it's asked, of course.
Yeah.
Again, it's a tough spot. If the verbiage isn't going to change, then I know where I stand. I don't speak for everyone. But
One question is, are we limited to approve, disapprove, or not? Or can we, per the discussion we had here, can we have a finance committee recommends using funds from account A, account B, or account C?
I believe we have to vote to recommend it as it's written.
Okay.
I think
How are
you
these,
can do
how are
the,
these articles written, specifically with the finance committee having to be the gatekeeper? How are they written without our consent to the verbiage used?
because it's.
How is it that select board alone chose the verbiage without our input?
So Steve, the select board is the writer of the warrant, right? It's their warrant. They have the authority under Mass General Law to put the warrant together however they wish for the warrant to come. FinCom, your point is well taken, Steve, job is to sit there and say, okay, we recommend this or we don't recommend this. But the articles
Heather,
itself go
Heather.
through the select board.
We are responsible for presenting a balanced budget. We do keep our eyes and ears open and listen to other people's input. We have to. We are making the judgments on behalf of everyone that is that is part of this community in town. To do so would be just inexcusable. And all I'm asking is how these were written without the same courtesy being returned. That's all I'm asking.
Can I say something? Heather is correct. Only the select board can put a warrant article on there. Someone has to write the articles. Generally, it's the town administrator with the input from the board of selectmen. These articles are not written any way different than what we've had in the past. We usually put or any of the available funds because at town meeting we can state where those funds are coming from. The
Carol,
only thing, the only thing we can't do with article money, we can't increase what we put in numbers. So we could reduce the numbers, but we can't. We've got to come to an agreement at town meeting. And I was at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, obviously, because I'm on the board, and I wasn't in favour of using free cash for all these articles. And it was my input, both at the Board of Selectmen's meeting and the prior capital meeting, that suggested other sources. So it's the Select Board are doing the best they can with what money we've got. And I agree, the last place I want to go is free cash. You know how I feel about free cash? You use it the year after. You don't borrow it in the year before.
I think that's what Steve's saying, though. Like, that's to me where the disconnect is we have a lot of people saying we don't agree with free cash, but somehow it's still, when I read that, if I'm just a member of the public and I read that, it comes across as like semantics and very convoluted. It's like, if we know there's going to be a discussion between finance and the select board about what funds to be used, shouldn't that happen before this is drafted? I think that's the point,
exactly.
I think everybody
Thank
gets
you.
who drafts it and who doesn't, but
Because right now, we
How
have
did we-
no option other than
Right.
to say yay, nay, or we're not going to do anything because we can't change it.
Right, in the,
At
free-
no
in the public sitting in the audience saying free cash is saying, oh, I'm for that.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt me, my rates don't go up. No one's gonna have the forum to explain to them the other impact that it's going to have if you vote for free cash. That should have been flushed out at other meetings. I thought it was a working document, so let me drop my last shoe. Why didn't the select board make a recommendation the night that they closed the articles? Because it says to be determined.
We haven't met since.
Are
We
you going to
haven't-
determine on the 13th?
We haven't met since that meeting. We haven't met since the meeting when we accepted the articles. So we can't make any recommendations prior to meeting, and we're not meeting till the 13th. I don't know why we're not meeting on the 6th. There must be some reason, but we're not meeting till the 13th. But Heather has already put in motion for the Cemetery Commission to meet in order to have a say on their articles, which is only courtesy to let them know that we're looking for funding from their revolving funds. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, you just don't want to take from a source without letting the owners know. So, and at the meeting I mentioned, the Board of Selectmen's meeting, I mentioned that, maybe we could maybe half and half some places. So I think it's going to be interesting at the town meeting because by then we will have got the answers to the cemetery ones, and then the rest we're up for discussion. And whatever happens, I still, to your point, Mark, I think it's easy to say what free cash is going to be used for. What this was this certified free cash is going to be, was intended by the finance committee. So I don't think there's a problem there.
When does the funding source get determined? At the town meeting? Or does this have to be approved first and then who, when, where, and what gets?
So if you take a look, just as an example of, can you go to number 2 in your handout? That was the article that was presented on June 5th, just as an example. I don't know if, unfortunately, Jeremy can't call it out.
I got it.
It says transfer the sum of 4666 from the capital depreciation fund,
Right, I understand.
period.
Yep, I understand that.
Specific,
I
not from available funds.
That's why I'm trying to understand, as written.
Right. I thought
If
that's
we-
what we were going to be able to do this evening, but apparently
Oh, but
we
he's
can't.
saying like, so
Right,
it says,
so
or
this is
available
locked-
funds.
This is locked in now.
For tonight it is.
If this gets approved, who decides what fund it comes out? of?
Right, because it
That's
says
what I'm
or
trying to
available
figure out.
So
funds.
say that, from what I've gathered, the cemetery commission may change this. The select board meets on the 13th, may change the verbiage.
They
We would
can't.
ha- We,
I thought.
Can they change the language? I thought the warrant article
They
was
can do the
closed.
The
motion.
motions.
they can change the
So they
motion.
can say, so if you look at past town meeting warrants, right, I got them up right now. A lot of them will say just on the article itself, to vote, raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, borrow, et cetera, et cetera. The warrant articles have always usually been very broad as to
Right,
where
but
the
to
funds
Ben's,
are.
can we just answer Ben's question, which is, so if this gets approved at the town meeting as is, it says from free cash or available
So it
funds.
can't get approved as is. This is
Oh,
the
okay.
motion. This
Okay.
is the warrant. The warrant gives you the four corners of the article.
Gotcha.
It says, here's the scope of what we're looking at. It is, the purpose is to present notice to the residents of what's gonna be voted on,
Okay.
right? What's the topic, how much money, and do we
so
have
then
an
when
idea
will
of
it be?
where?
So the motions get approved on the 13th.
The
at select
motion
board
gets narrowed down. Now, Jeremy, in the past, just looking at these things, 90% of the time of the ones I'm looking at, Finance Committee will make recommendation at town meeting. So it's been a very consistent theme for FinCom not to make a recommendation till town meeting, which makes sense because you often don't have the motion till town meeting. Or alternatively, what could happen, right? Let's say we end up making the motion, Carol stands up, says the motion is to take money from the cemetery, perpetual care, sale of cemetery lots, right? Someone seconds it, and someone says, actually, no, I want to amend that motion. I want to change it, I want to take it from X, right? They can do that on town meeting floor, and then you'd have to, if FinCom had a quorum, you'd have to amend the motion. Or amend your recommendation potentially, because you'd be asked, do you still recommend a change of the funds? But the warrant is just simply a notice to the townspeople of what the topic is to be discussed. It's like an agenda for a meeting, right? But it's a lot tighter. And the motion we develop, and, some people post the motions ahead of time, some towns, hand them out the day of the town meeting. It just depends on what we're looking at. We're trying to use the most updated information. If the amounts go down, let's say things happen amazingly with the generator, it's not as expensive as we thought, we could reduce that amount on town meeting floor.
Right, I just wanted to understand, so right now, as I understand this, we're voting, do we agree that $1,800 from somewhere should be used for this?
That's the better thought process.
Yeah, and then I guess the other question is, I was fine until you said, oh, if we want to create a motion before, we can hand it out. Who would do that?
So generally speaking, usually the town side, right, in our case, the moderator often drafts the motions, we input, what have you. He'll usually put those together and we usually have them available. I think sometimes we try to have them available in advance of the meeting, otherwise we have them, we can hand out. But residents, it's the town meeting, it's open town meeting, residents can participate. So a resident, Susie Q, could come, maybe she has copies of her own motion that she wants to make pertaining to an article.
Right, but that's gonna be not gonna be applicable to an article like this. I mean, that's obviously,
But the whole point, so
she's
here's,
not gonna come ask for $20,000 to fix a generator.
going back to my earlier point, that's why I think it's still premature to vote on these articles for recommendation right now, because you don't know what this recommended source currently is. It's wide open. Or it might as well just say, or any available funds, but generally we say X or, to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds. We just don't have those 100% solidified yet.
I'm looking at something that says free cash and doesn't say anything about any other fund.
So that's because you don't have the most recent
Because
version.
when did that come out?
This,
About 5 o'clock.
today.
Wait a
It came
minute,
from
you
town
folks-
council, it's been at town council.
So,
We're looking at something.
It says
that
or
is-
any, it says or any available funds.
What I said-
That's what's
So,
missing.
and-
Yeah, yeah.
as I
sent-
mentioned
Hold
to
on one
Mark in the
second.
email.
I sent this to everybody at 6:30 and said, sorry, folks, just in.
Yep.
And it was
I'm
in
sorry,
it.
I was in the car.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. It was sent to me at 6:16. I sent it to you at 6:30, and it reads, free cash or available funds. If I'm in the audience and I'm not plugged in to everything goes on, I'm going to say, I vote for free cash. And I think you got 6 people sitting around the table here tonight that think that should be the last option, but that's going to be, not only is it the first option, it's capitalized to draw specific attention to it. And if you look at the old one, I made a point at the October 25th Select Board meeting, you got to take it out of the heading.
It is.
It is.
I know that, but you're leading the witness, but now you have it in the particular text where this should be just from available funds, period.
I guess-
Why did free cash stay in there?
So I guess I would say this, right? Like, at this point, this is what the warrant is, this is what the select board voted. I don't know if it is worth a lot of time to spend jumping into the detail of the language of the article. The language of the article right now is approved by the select board as is. The motion will modify. I think the decision before FinCom at this point is how you guys want to address it. Do you want to take any action or recommendations on these articles now? Do you want to wait until see what the select board does on the 13th and see what the motions hash into? Do you want to gamble trying to have a quorum for the 20th? How do you guys want to proceed on that? I don't think it makes best use of everyone's time to debate over the language of the article that's already approved.
So let me.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so I agree with that statement, Heather, and it feels like now that the clouds have been lifted, that for these next ones, our discussion should be around what you're going to stand up and recommend. We don't have to write it in the article, but, you know, as a group, as you brought up, there are other available sources, and what, you know, if I recall the way, you know, Rich would do it, he would stand up and say, we would want to make a motion to use the cemetery fund. Let's use that as an example. And that would be the FinCom's recommendation at that point. So we wouldn't vote on these. We would leave it TBD. What we as a group would do is discuss where we think the best place to take that money from. And that's the motion we would make. That's what it feels like. Since these are already written and approved, we can't do anything with them.
Unfortunately, Heather's left the room, but I would say that my experience is that these warrant articles have been much cleaner and tighter and specific than we're acquiescing to right now. And I just can't imagine myself, forgive the audience for this next point, of explaining the special revenue fund to them, explaining the reserve fund to them, explaining capital depreciation fund to them. I just think it's going to be a nightmare, and they're going to say, I don't understand, I like free cash.
Well, no, I agree with that, and that's why you can't do that, right? You would say, you're the director of FinCom, right? Chairman of FinCom. My recommendation is use cemetery fund, period. There is no or this or that, but that's the discussion we as a group come to an agreement on. Not a multiple choice. It's we're responsible, as Steve said, for the budget and a balanced budget. Our recommendation from a financially respected place is use this fund.
Fiduciary responsibility.
Right,
This is where we feel the fund should be sourced.
even not to take it one step back, but in reality, what we're really saying is, we don't want you to use free cash. Don't care where you take it from, because free cash we need for the budget.
But I think, Jeremy, we can't be open like that to the select board.
That's
right?
the problem, right? And again,
Bingo.
that's the problem. Is even though it might not be our position to tell you where to get it from, we can definitely tell you we would prefer to have free cash to balance the budget with. Please try to take it from somewhere else. Where that is, we could agree on, make a recommendation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be accepted.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I
as a
appreciate it.
group,
Yeah.
And say, that at some point, we have a recommendation,
Yep.
right? We look at the budget, we know where the excesses are. We say, this is where it should come from. I guess as Heather mentioned I don't know, I don't think we can touch the wording. We can agree that it's not the best, but at this point, we can't argue with wording anymore. Is that true? So,
I still think it's silly that we would be voting and arguing and discussing this based on after the fact how it was written, where the funds would come from. It seems like there should be some ability to have that discussion before it's written. If we know the budget, we know the funds. If that's not our ability to have that input before, even
But-
just a suggestion, you know.
But keep in mind that any article we've ever written is always something like raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds. And the reason it says that, right, is to give the flexibility, because if something happens, something changes, you need to be able to change it on town meeting floor. If you don't give the broader scope of or available funds, whether you start out with
Well, I-
raise and appropriate free cash or something else, if you don't give that broader veil.
I agree with that. I don't think you're hearing what I'm saying. I agree with that part of it. I don't agree with the free cash before it. I think we could have all met before and said, we could have given a different option for the what goes before the or available funds instead of free. That's what I'm saying. It
So-
seems like we're arguing about it after the fact when we could have discussed it before the fact and we wouldn't be here right now.
So we don't usually do a lot of special town meetings, right? We do annuals, we don't often do specials.
Right.
If you look at annuals, you're always gonna almost always see raise and appropriate, right?
Yep.
But we're on a special. We're not really talking about adjusting the budget at this point. We'd have to decrease something else to increase something, and it gets really messy. So we don't have raise and appropriate, but you need something. It shouldn't just be or any available funds. You have to say, okay, let's take from X or any available funds.
Well,
Or
that's
take
what
from
I'm-
any fund except free cash. How does that work?
It doesn't.
But I
So,
think, Heather, that's what I'm saying is instead
Yeah.
of them all saying free cash or, I'd say leave that in there. But
Okay.
we could have probably given some advice ahead of time and said capital depreciation or any
state
appropriate
fees.
fund. That's all I'm saying. I don't understand why that didn't happen ahead of time.
So for
Instead of
three-
us arguing about it after the fact
Yeah.
because free cash is in there. So,
So for Articles 3, 4, and 5, where would your recommendations come from? What source for 3, 4, and 5? I think you've been talking about the cemetery ones.
Where would you recommend 3, 4, and 5?
For 3, 4, and 5, where are you thinking the money's coming from? Because these are the bigger ones, not the smaller
Yeah.
ones.
right, but I think we discussed that we as a group can discuss these, where they're coming from, but as a vote, I thought the thought was.
Well,
No,
To-
I'm just
to Carol's
interested where you
question,
get from.
to answer Carol's
Yeah,
question,
Yeah,
the $6,000 requested in Article 3,
yep.
what is the basis? Is the basis because of the special state elections as a result of someone
Yes,
Yes.
resigning? Fine, that one's explained. Article 4, $12,000. That's because, I'm assuming you're going out on maternity leave.
15,000,
Wink, wink, and you need a replacement while you're gone.
yes.
well, I think the desire is for the board to have someone in the helm in my absence, and you
Gotcha.
can't pull from my leave time. You have to pay
Gotcha,
me.
as opposed to calling you while you're in the delivery room. Got it. Article 5, $20,000 for a public generator repairs, okay?
Yes.
So my point is, we have information, based upon the information for 4, 5, and 6, it sounds like 3, 4, 5, and 6. It sounds like 2, we want them to Jeremy's earlier point, they have 108,000, 1,800 is a drop in that's not even a rounding error. They could fund that internally, one of their existing funds. But Carol's asking for 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Just 3, 4,
What
5.
would we recommend as the funding source to pay for what's being asked for, correct?
3, 4, and 5, yes.
What did we recommend for 2?
Well, I think that the cemetery commission's gonna meet and if everything goes, I think they're considering taking it out of that.
Yeah,
think
the
they'll
1,800
definitely
out of
have a
to
conversation.
Jeremy's
That has
point,
an, that has an open.
Mark, to Jeremy's point.
So let me leave with my chin. Let's go to number 3.
Yep,
I recommend the reserve fund.
Okay, 6,000 that's the reserve fund.
So if we have,
Because
Hold on, let me
it's
pick a human.
unexpected.
so if I have Lori put forward the form for reserve fund, and presumably you guys have a meeting before town meeting, you guys would be able to vote on that reserve fund transfer, and then we'd be able to just pass over
Pass
this
over.
article?
Yep. Can you do that?
Number 4, I recommend the stabilization fund.
Why?
The operating stabilization fund?
Yep. If you go to,
So just keep
handout
in,
that I passed out in your package, and you look at item number 6, there's $360,000 there. This money's being expended, which, by the way, I'm not in favor of in the first place, which is another argument for another day. It's to stabilize the town in the period of time when you're gonna be away. Perfect candidate for stabilization fund.
so just keep in mind that those are like the most emergency funds,
Yes.
right? So if you start tapping into those and something catastrophic happens, that's your last bailout before you have to go to the taxpayer to raise money.
I guess I'm feeling if it's 15,000 that it's that bad and we're short that bad, it's negligible. Right, it's 5% of that budget.
It's
So
just
just-
that it looks bad on paper when the auditor sees that we're having to go mid-year
are we,
to
are
our
we still,
stabilization fund.
are we still talking about Article 4?
We are, I recommend
yes.
stabilization
Yeah.
fund, or don't fund it at all.
Well, I don't agree with that approach either.
Keep in mind that operating stabilization, we pulled 86,000 this year to balance our budget. So we're already talking about a dire next year. We're already talking about, even if you don't touch the free cash, or less free cash than you had last year, talking about increased expenses. So, you know, everything you can look at with the same scope, right? Which is, this is gonna hurt the upcoming budget piece.
What's available right now in the reserve fund? Is all
40,000.
40,000
All
available?
40,000. Yep.
Could the reserve fund be a possible alternative for Article 4?
Yes?
It-
It depends on your perspective. Mark and I would disagree on number 4.
I'm asking my chair.
It's not my first choice, but yeah, we have $40,000. We just spent 1,800. So
It's coming out of the cemetery fund.
No.
So I like stabilization. Stabilize the town while you're out. Let me jump to number 6. Positively, absolutely, without a doubt, the cemetery funds, as we've seen previously, or the capital depreciation. And here's why. This is 1/3 of a lawnmower that the cemetery commission was asked 3 times to participate in, because the actual cost was $13,000. The DPW department made the request, and we said, how about if DPW, what do you use it for? We mow the commons, we mow the ball fields, and we mow the cemeteries. So Capital Improvement Planning Committee said, let's go to the other beneficiaries of this, and Recreation said, we'll fund it for 1/3. Cemetery said, we'll fund it for 1/3. DPW said, we'll fund it for 1/3. The article that I've shown you 3 times already this evening was DPW's 1/3. The Cemetery Commission was asked to confirm 3 times that that is where this 1/3 is going to come from. And they agreed in the affirmative all 3 times. Now, 4 months later, they're coming back and say, we can't do that. Something's wrong with that particular commission to not have seen that they couldn't afford it 4 months ago. So now I'm suggesting, let's not use free cash and take away from the budget that's going to affect 51 other cost centers. Let's have them take it out of their revolving funds, their special revenue funds, or capital depreciation. I don't have a choice as to which is the preference, but not free cash. Otherwise, we're rewarding bad budgeting, quite frankly. Which at some point, there's got to be some accountability for these things keep popping up all the time.
Would it make, would it make most sense for Article 6, the capital depreciation fund, because it's an asset that we
I
are
think it should
adding?
go to capital depreciation because that's where the other 1/3 went.
I believe that that's what we should be recommending.
Right. So that leaves the generator. The generator, my choices are combination of the reserve fund and capital depreciation fund.
Mark, can I ask a question
Then for
relative
me.
to Article 5? $20,000 for the public safety generator repairs. Do we know what, is that the most cost-effective option to repair as opposed to replace?
Yeah.
It was
So the cost to buy a new one is around 150.
that
150,000, which we could depreciate over a term of what, 3-5 years?
So the generator itself isn't necessarily in bad shape. It's just that one part, but like anything else.
The Mike's got in, nested on a board, shorted the board out, generator wouldn't work. So this cost is to replace the board, also for the rental that we had to get for 2 months at $6,600 a month.
Yeah,
Got
it's
it.
something-
How old is the existing generator?
As old as the
age of
PSC.
bus- Yeah, the building.
It's what?
As old as the PSC, as old as the building.
The total cost is about $26,000. Some of it can be funded in the public safety building already. The other $20,000 is what we're talking about right now.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, the generator itself didn't die, a component did, and it wouldn't work. You know, 13,000 of that is the rental for 2 months for the one they had to put there while it didn't work.
What I'm trying to ascertain is, okay, $20,000 this year. When we're going into budget for next year, are we then saying, uh-oh, you know what? It really was only a Band-Aid to repair it. We have to actually buy a new one because this one
Right.
is long in tooth and we're just gonna keep sinking good money into it after bad. So,
A family of mice ruined a component and it had to be replaced.
okay.
They,
all right.
they got into a sealed box and they did
Well, I
their business
understand
on a
that, but I'm
board.
still asking the same question.
Yeah, no,
That's
good
probably
question.
that's probably a
Don't come back
question-
to us in next year and say,
But that's probably a question for like when we're looking at their budget.
Budget.
Yeah.
Right.
You know. 'cause
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, I mean, hopefully they're going to secure the box so that mice don't get in it again. Would be my hope. So
Almost
That's another
impossible.
$1,000.
That's almost impossible.
that's fine. Yeah.
I'm selling my cat for $1,000.
all right, question to our chair. If Article 5 and 6, our recommendation is to go to capital depreciation fund, what does that do to a capital depreciation fund? At what point are we relative to its health?
Well, we have 52,000 in the budget right now.
So we're talking about basically 25 against that 52 for Articles 5 and 6. Round numbers. Okay, thank you.
So who's the parliamentarian amongst us? We're, what are we voting on? I made the recommendations.
I'm not sure how to handle that. I'm really not.
Well, if we're going to vote on them, we have to vote on them as they're. I
Right.
mean, we have
As
all
they
the
are.
great ideas, but
I believe, if I may, in summation, you guys can correct me. Article 2, we're saying that the cemetery commission, those people should go back as they look at things. When did you say they were meeting? The 8th. Our recommendation is they look and that $1,800 should come out of one of those two accounts that we talked about. I believe that's what we recommended, or that we discussed and felt that was the most judicious approach. For Article 3, we talked about the reserve fund, correct? I think that's what we said. If I may, just allow me to finish, and then you guys, we can debate and talk about what else. Article 4, we talked about the operations stabilization fund or the reserve fund. I know we have further discussion there, but I believe those were the two options that we discussed as the most prudent choices there. And then Articles 5 and 6, we talked about the capital depreciation fund, funding that $25,000, rough numbers. That's what I understand based upon the copious chicken scratch that I wrote down as we were talking.
Yeah, and I think that's a good summation. I'm still going back to the parliamentarian piece. What what are we voting on? Are we voting to, if we vote to approve, then I don't think we have any of those options to have that discussion that I've thrown out. If we vote to take no action, then the question is, when do we meet again to take that action? And we vote to disapprove, which is, I think, what we need to do, and then have me make the recommendation the night of the annual
I
meeting.
think can we vote to make recommendation at town meeting?
Right, I think that my understanding is you would leave it as TBD.
Yeah, that's, I'm looking for a
But
proper
then we
way
would
to
have
do it.
We would have to get a quorum. We could do it by Zoom. I could set it up. I'm not saying everybody's got to make a meeting, but if we could all get together and just find and look at the final after the select board meets and say, hey, here's what they came up with. Here's our and then we can all agree on what Mark's going to say at the town meeting.
So no, I'm not gonna hold anybody to this, but who's planning on attending the special town meeting?
What day is it?
20th.
20th, right?
20th. So it's pretty certain we have a quorum. Is it certain?
I'm certain.
I'm here.
I'm certain, I'm in
I need
town.
to check my schedule.
So we had 4.5.
Ben's one person.
Do we know?
Tim's gotta go.
Do we know if
We don't
Seth's
know about
available?
Seth, 4.5. So what we'll probably plan on doing is meeting at 6 o'clock before the 7 o'clock meeting, or 6:30 if we are clear in our mind what our votes are gonna be.
I thought Jeremy made a good suggestion, though. Could we make a Zoom meeting and
Yep.
after
Yep.
I say some time of the week of the 13th after
Yep.
the,
We're allowed to do that still.
Needed two
We can
fallback
Zoom all the way through
positions.
2025.
Yep.
So
because
yeah.
I believe that we would we have a greater chance of getting our quorum or the full attendance if we
Yeah.
do a Zoom meeting. Because if you're traveling, you still can dial in
Sure.
to a Zoom meeting.
So that would give you a week, assuming that we would have something you could do it, the 14th through the weekend if we needed to, so.
So back to Article 2, is there a motion to recommend approval at town meeting?
Can we do them all?
Yeah.
2 through 6?
We don't have to do this tonight. Do we?
Okay, 2 through 6. Moving right along. Number 7, we already talked about. So we're on Article 8.
So for 2 through 6, our official position is.
We're gonna have, I mean, again,
is
when are you
Right.
planning on printing out the,
The motions?
yes.
So definitely the week before. Donna would kill me if I made her wait till Monday.
So that's what I'm saying. So if we wait to meet until, say, the 17th, you're already gonna print them out.
And
So maybe
sometimes
we
in,
should just proactively say, on Articles 2 through 6, we will make a recommendation at the town meeting.
Okay.
That covers us, because what I don't want it to say is nothing.
I
And
prefer
say
that.
we can't meet until that Friday night and they're already printed out. Does that make sense?
So I'm going back to my earlier point. I would entertain a recommendation or a motion to make recommendation to make our recommendation at the special town meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
On Articles 2
Seconded.
through 6?
On
Articles 2
Articles
through
2
6.
2
yes.
through 6.
Friendly amendment, Articles 2 through 6. A motion, a second. Any discussion?
So I'm clear, so if the verbiage is changed after everyone meets, and we can meet by Zoom, via Zoom before Heather needs to print it again, we can adjust our,
Yeah. If we say it came out on Thursday, say it came out on Monday the 13th, we got it Tuesday morning the 14th. If we met Tuesday night the 14th and made our recommendation, you would probably not print it out until, I can't make that, I can't say that.
if
We can't tell them.
if we know there's a meeting coming for FinCom,
Yep.
we'll try to hold as much, as long as we know when the meeting, if it's Friday at 7 o'clock, Donna's gonna tell me no, and she's gonna hit print. But if it's as long as it's a little bit earlier in that week, I'm sure it's no problem.
But we're not talking about changing the warrant.
No, just
I'm
our
just making-
vote.
I'm just making sure.
So it's whether
Okay.
whether our vote says make
I just-
recommendation at town meeting, but if
sure.
we could meet if we could meet, say, the 14th, we could have our recommendation on the actual,
Right.
that would be us committing to meeting on the 14th.
Further discussion, Tim?
All set.
Discussion closed. All in favor of the motion as been presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Passes as made. Thank
Okay.
you.
Article,
That was easy.
Article
Wish I
8.
had my staples.
did we vote on 7 yet? Yeah, I mean, it's only 8:45.
All right, Article 8. Heather, you're up.
This is just administrative, so Mass General Law requires us under Chapter 30B, Section 12B, for any contract that, for goods or services, in particular, that it expands beyond 3 years. We're supposed to get town meeting approval to do so. This is just the lease of our postage machine that we have. It's cheaper if we lease it for 5 years than it is if we lease it for 3 years. The cost payments are much higher. It's not lease to own, it's just literally lease.
So it's going to be in the budget whether it's for 3 years or 5 years, but new procurement laws require us to vote here now because it's more than,
It allows us to enter into a contract for 5 years instead of the max of 3. And it's gonna be a lower payment each year for the 5 than it would be for 3. And again, it's not lease to own, it's just lease. They like having a longer contract, so they charge us less money per year if it's longer than the other way. This contract lapses, I wanna say in October, or I think we extended it into November a little bit, so that we'd have time to get it to town meeting.
is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve Article 8 for the contract for the 5 years on the postage machine.
And I second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. The article passes as approved. Article 19, Heather.
9.
So-
9, sorry.
So Olivia Knoll's been around for a long time.
Thank God they're on 19.
I want to say over 10 years, Carol. They've had that development done, Olivia Knoll, give or take.
No. 5?
Almost as, somewhere beyond 1, less than
Yes.
10. How's that? So the subdivision's been complete for a while. Planning board was waiting for a number of steps to be taken by the developer. Those steps have now all been met. We had to go through a legal process where the select board made a recommendation to the planning board made a recommendation back to the select board, and then the select board voted the intent to do it. So what it is we're accepting Olivia Knoll as a public way, right? So we have a few roads in town, not very many, that are still considered private ways, and even fewer than those that we actually don't pave. This one up until now was a private way that we were not responsible for paying. So the homeowners in that area had to figure it out, the contractor had to figure out how to pave it and maintain it. But at this point, they're saying, okay, everything's been met, all of our plans are up to date, can you please accept this road so that we can move forward and have the town take care of it? If there's a finance question, yes, anytime you add a road, obviously it's gonna add a cost because it takes time to pave it, maintain it and so forth like that, but it's something we standardly do. And they've now met every one of our requirements since they came about.
Is there a motion to approve the article as written?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor of the article?
Aye.
Recommend approval of the article as written.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Recommend approval passes. Article 10.
So Wachusett Regional School District Agreement, so we just amended this
Oh, I
a few
think
years.
I'm sorry.
10.
Are you with me? Sorry.
So.
Jeremy was trying to scroll down to the language, I think,
I
after
got
the.
10. Yeah, 10 is what you said.
Yep, Wachusett Regional.
So the.
Do you want me to keep going, Mark, or you want me to wait till you catch up?
Did you have another copy? Was this on the old copy that I had? The
You
old
looking
co-
for the article or the language?
Oh, the trash fund was the one you had, Mike.
Yeah.
That's gone.
So trash fund is gone.
Yes.
Okay, so yep, I'm good. Wachusett Regional.
So The Wachusett Regional School Agreement, we amended a few years back, not too long at all, but the school district asked us to make another amendment, had to do with mostly their calculation of votes. It states 1.1, 1.7, 1.8. It's attached. I believe there's even highlights on the sections they've changed. This is something they have to put to all the towns. Some towns, I think, are tackling it now. Some are going to wait to annual. Some don't have like Princeton doesn't have a special town meeting schedule, so they weren't going to put one together for this. This is housekeeping for us.
Okay.
There's no reason to necessarily say no, but
Can I speak on this?
And you're going to put 2 slides up, but go right ahead.
Again, which slides do you want me to put up?
Slides 10 and 11. And in your package, folks, slides 10 and 11.
So, again, what this is doing is, I'll give you the Evelyn Wood version of this. It's a reorganization that's, in the end, is going from 16 to 17, giving Holden 1 more seat.
Based on what?
Based on population,
Okay.
member towns. To me, now, really looking at what this does, and when you talk way to vote, this doesn't make any sense for Paxton, for either taxpayers or for students, because what you're doing now is look at it from a point of view is what separate the towns. Holden at the current rate, Holden votes with either Rutland or Princeton, they have a majority. Now it's going to be Holden votes with anybody, they have a majority. They're giving themselves 1 more. Budget-wise, we know that we've had a difficult time with the school committee. Last year, we were looking really for some help keeping that number below 4%. E&D came back, we asked for something, and we didn't get it. We were thrown crumbs. To me, I get that people say this is housekeeping. It's not housekeeping. I mean, Wachusett in this year this is a turnaround year for them. I mean, these are the people that control the purse strings. It's not Riley, it's the school committee. They're still in the bottom of the barrel for per student spending. And their budget is going to expect, I heard we could see a 5% increase this year. What this is going to do is skew voting. Sterling voted on this last week, turned it down overwhelmingly for the same reasons that I'm telling you right now.
So can I direct everybody's attention to what's on the screen and also in your package? If you take,
Want to go to 11 or
I
10?
want to go to 10.
Gotcha.
first.
Go ahead.
You were just there. If you take what's being proposed, Holden at 7. Everybody see that? Mm-hmm. And any other town at 2. Let's say Paxton or Princeton. Okay? That would mean that there's now 9. 9 over 17 votes is 52.94%.
They have the simple majority.
Yeah, it actually is a huge impact. Even
Huge
though it's-
impact. So Holden and one other town, of 5 member towns, Holden and one other town can set the stage. If you kept it at 6, Holden and one other town would be only 50%. So I think what we need to keep in mind is that this changes the landscape more than just housekeeping. And if you go to the next page, which is literally an article that was appearing in the Landmark, which is in your package. It should be number 11 if you have it, Jeremy.
Right here.
The Finance Committee for Sterling made the exact same point that we've just made. And if you look at the 3rd column, it was overwhelmingly defeated, 223 to 46.
And there's no upside. There's absolutely, it's not saving us any money. It's not doing anything.
So I would entertain a recommendation to disapprove.
And keep in mind, if we disapprove, it is disapproved. It only needs 2 towns to disapprove. So if our meeting disapproves it, it's done.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I understand the logic of this, but if the budget, the way it's gonna be broken out from each member town is based on this percentage of population, right? So let's say it's a $100 million budget. Holden has to pay 44 million-ish. We pay 11, 7.69%, and all that great stuff. And the one question I have is, moving forward, how would we view the right way to add bodies?
How would we review what?
So this is more of a general question, so I guess maybe I should take this offline. But it's really, at some point, as people spend more money, at what point do you hold it the same? The ratio is 7, and again, I'm just doing math here, right? Is 43% in one other town equals over 50% from a population, from a payment standpoint of funding. So from a financial standpoint, ignore the voting, Holden in one other town is greater than 50% financing the school. So
The way that, and the only thing that I looked at this is from a fiscal point of view, saying that I don't care what Holden does with their vote or their money, but what I don't want them to do is tell me what I have to do with my voter money. And if you look at the way that, the budget is what the budget is. The school committee sets the budget. The school committee presents a budget that we all have to absorb. Either we say yes or we say no.
Well, I think my response to that would be, you don't send a kid from Holden into the school and expect them to get 50% more education than a kid from You know what I mean? I think we're looking at it very literally. Like, just one town having that much control in general, I just think I don't care how much they're putting into it. It's still a regional district. At the end of the day, everybody in it needs to almost have an equal say. The fact that it's just based on the money that's going in is that's tricky because the money is just based on the number of people that live there. I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but it's.
I understand what you're saying, and
it's still to me it's kind of like voting, like having an electoral college to an extent. It's like the impact needs to be a little bit more.
Yeah, but what we're saying, this has nothing to do with whether we agree with the budget or not. This just says if Holden, if I understand what's being said is Holden and one other town, in theory, if they all vote a line, can approve a budget. That doesn't mean that it's approved town-wide. We just need 2 towns to say no.
But it's the budget that your town's going to see.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Then you get Holden and Rutland, which are.
Well, it's really Holden Rutland, Holden Sterling,
The
Holden.
new one can be Holden and whoever.
Well, but I mean, Holden and Rutland disproportionately or really stand out in terms of population and the money they put in. So, I don't know. For me, it's just.
This to me just doesn't seem.
Doesn't seem necessary.
I get a feeling that it's not necessary, and there's something behind this.
So
Well, that's where I was going. I mean, what
No
what
offense,
is
yeah,
the
that's
What's
net
the benefit of the
result-
school?
What's
No
the net
offense.
benefit to Holden, right?
Don't know.
From going from 6 to 7. There's still the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
In my experience,
Irregardless,
my
right?
experience with the school board is there do tend to be ulterior motives. I hate to say it.
Yeah, exactly. It
And
has to be.
I know you have to plead the
alternative.
fifth.
I mean, you've got years on that.
I know, that's why I was, people don't always vote together, but
Right.
let's not belabor it too much.
Yeah.
I'm done with my conversation.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
I
I just don't see what benefit it brings to taxpayers of this town.
Yep.
Right, exactly.
And that's
It
what we
boils down
vote
to
on,
that.
right? What
Right.
makes sense for our taxpayers?
And if
How
they-
is this going to how is this going to reduce my budget?
Right.
I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't see it either way, I guess is where I'm standing. So, let's,
So the end of the discussion, there was a
Motion to-
motion to disapprove. There was a second, and we've ended the discussion. All in favor of voting to disapprove the motion?
Aye.
Say
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none.
I'll abstain.
And abstentions, 1. So it passes nonetheless to disapprove. Article 11, Heather.
So revolving fund bylaw, Jeremy, can you scroll down to the language for me, please?
Yep.
So we have a revolving fund bylaw back after the Municipal Modernization Act around 2016. There was a requirement that any revolving or most revolving funds had to have a bylaw attached to them saying what the fund was, who could control it, where the fees and charges come from, what they can expend it on, any restrictions. And then each year there had to be a decision, as there always had been, at town meeting to appropriate or vote to maximize the amount of money that could be utilized in that fund in or out. So what we're doing here is just a little housekeeping. So if you looked at the capital improvement planning document that was created by the Collins Center back about 5 or so years ago, they had actually recommended starting to put money aside for some of the town buildings, for things such as, a septic system replacement or so forth. We currently lease out 10 West. That has its own septic system in it. Last year, remember, we pulled in less revenues than we normally would because we had to give credit for that month, a couple months of rent because of an expense that had to be paid. I think it was I forget what it was, like a boiler or something, some large piece. That was several months worth of rent. The idea here, and it doesn't take a lot from the general fund revenues, you're talking $4,000 a year, but it allows us to put it essentially in its own version of a savings account. So we're taking money in for leasing the building or renting the building. We put it in, we're able to put it back towards property maintenance costs for rented town buildings, right? So if we ever rent out more buildings, we already have the account set up. It's something that would build year over year. So if we get to a point, we have to replace another boiler for that building. We don't have to go to reserve fund. We don't have to give credit for rent. We can cover the cost for that. If we have to, start looking at replacing a septic at some point or something larger, it may not cover all of that depending on how long we have it, recurring, but at least we'll take some of the hit off of our expense for it. And like any good landlord, it's just good to have money aside, ready to go for repairs in case something happens if we're renting out a building. So I know, Mark, you've had different opinions about renting the building in the first place, selling the building and so forth, but the current fact is we currently have an agreement, we currently have rent, so we might as well put it someplace we can utilize.
And just to clarify, the only building that the town rents right now is 10 West?
Yes.
Okay.
So, is there a motion to be made on Article 11?
I'll make a motion to approve Article 11.
Second.
Any discussion? None. All in favor of recommending approval of Article 11 as written?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes. Heather, can we do one bit of housekeeping? I I hate to even say. Articles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think there's reference to the June 30th meeting, and it says Article 15. I have the June 30th warrant articles, and I believe it's Article 13.
Which one? Oh, number 2?
Number 2.
Number 2 says Article 15.
Yep, I'll go back and take one more look at those
Article
numbers.
3 says 15, 4 says 15, 5 says 15. I'm looking at the warrant article. 15 was pay path.
Okay, I'll go back and take another
that
look,
should be
Mark,
13.
to make sure that's correct. Worst case scenario, that's
So it's
administratively
not correct, so
done.
it's not correct as written, so can you go back and tweak free cash while you're at it?
No, but I can make sure it's correct on the motions.
Oh, okay.
I didn't capture the note.
It's an administrative error. I think we're okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take that as a no. All right, so, any updates regarding committees that we also serve on? Jeremy, I know you're serving on the Economic Development Committee. Can you give us a quick update?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick 60 seconds. So EDC has begun to meet again. We've had 2 meetings. We have restructured the committee with, we've got a good group of members now. We've changed our numbers. We had an in-person and we had a Zoom. We've met to the things we're focusing on right now is working on updating our mission statement to make it a little more reflective of what we think it should be. We thought it was a little bit bland. We've begun to reach out to chambers of commerce from Wachusett, from Worcester, and as well to other towns that are similar to Paxton to get to their EDCs and find out what they did to increase economic development in their town. And also, a big part of that is right now we're going through a zoning bylaw rewrite, which there's a steering committee for that. We participate in that. We need to really know what our zoning allows before we start trying to attract a business. You know, where's our mixed use go? Can we have industrial? Do we need gas stations, restaurants? We're not really familiar with that enough. So EDC is starting to get some traction. We're meeting again probably next week, I believe, within the next week or two. So we're back on a regular every couple of weeks, and every time we meet, I'll give us an update on that.
Jeremy, quick question.
Yeah.
The surveys, are they done relative to the businesses and to the community at large?
Yeah, so the business survey came back. It was, there wasn't a lot of, the survey that the EDC didn't get a lot of traction, didn't have a lot of good results. The zoning survey had quite a few results, like 125, and there's some really good information as to what the people want. What do they want to see for new business? What do they want to see for that? I can share that all with us for the next meeting and show you the results. And that's kind of, the one thing I will say is you can expect this from Paxton. For as many people that want to see a restaurant, as many people don't. It's like literally almost split. Like, I think it would be great if we had a CVS in town. I don't want to have a CVS in town. So you've got as many people that appreciate the bedroom community aspect as want to see taxes get lowered, see more economic development. But in general, I'd say there's a pretty good feeling in town about economic development. So.
How responding to like, did they collect demographic information? I know age bands.
I don't know because EDC did not run that. There's some information. I'm not sure. I'll have to get. There's a little bit. Probably not. But there's a lot of good. There was a lot of good responses. So I will get the. I'll let everybody in on that next time. I forgot about that. I apologize.
If you bear with me, I'll try to be brief, but give you an update on the Wachusett Regional School District Audit Advisory Board that I serve on in a capacity as a Finance Committee member. The good news is we're having a meeting on November 14th. The bad news is we're going to be reviewing the June 30th, 2022 audit and not the June 30th, 2023 audit. But the very good news is that we're meeting with the auditors. I think for those of you that know, audit committees were the result of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and they were designed to be set up for publicly traded companies, but also public interest companies, of which the regional school district is. To my knowledge, it's the only audit advisory board that never met with the auditors. And the new membership wasn't having that. And we're meeting with the auditors, so I hope to have a report to you later on. I don't suspect it's going to be good news because of the fact that we're reviewing the June 30th, 22 and not the June 30th, 23. So it's a little slow in turning this battleship around in downtown Main Street, but at least there's some movement, not the least of which is the audit committee is meeting with the auditors. So that's a big step forward. Under old business, I would just throw this out to Carol. I think at some point, to Heather, I'm sorry. I looked at Carol and said the wrong name, I apologize. The Tivnan Field lights issue has got to, I think, at some point be brought to the fore again. Don't want to cover it this evening because time's not on our side, but there's a lot of false starts, there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of talk that it can't be done, it won't be done. I think we should have a candid conversation of where that is including maybe just cutting our losses and recharacterizing that particular amount of money. I know it would be delayed in terms of when it would be put back in play, but I think it's a discussion worth having. It's not a finance committee issue per se, as much as it's a capital improvement planning committee, but it's gonna find its way to finance, and just make that offer at a future meeting to bring us up to speed as to where that is. I know that various people around the table are asking, where are we on that? I don't always have the answers, and I think those of us that are being asked those questions should have the answers so we can answer it. So it's an invitation to put it on the table. They don't mean to put you on the spot this evening. So, enough said. So, you don't look like you want to comment, so I'll take that as a motion to adjourn.
Public session, there's no one here.
Yeah, public session, hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Second.
Well,
Discussion.
real quick, we are gonna try to get a Zoom meeting, obviously not on the 14th, because that's your audit advisory board, but as soon as possible after the 13th, so let's everybody keep their,
If you can keep the 15th kind of.
okay, yeah, let's
Wednesday.
keep the 15th open, if we can. Okay. Yep. Awesome.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark,
Always.
Jeremy,